The new crash pads are so underrated. Look, I know they nerfed it and everyone loves the rocket ram, but I think people forgot just how good of an item crash pads are. The only difference between the new crash pad junior and the original crash pad is that it doesn't break builds and it's smaller. The fact that it doesn't break builds pretty much removes most of its fighting utility, but the fact that it's smaller actually gives it extra use cases for mobility purposes. Like now, it easily fits inside your box, so anyone on your team can reuse your crash pads without other teams being able to shoot it to separate you. But it's been a while, so let me remind you of all the use cases of crash pads. The first, most powerful use is in combination with any of the launch pads around the map. If you launch pad into a crash pad, you're launched straight to where you want to go without pulling out your glider and taking 0 fall damage. It takes you much further than a short pad would and removes the risk of getting beamed when you take a high pad. The easiest way to do it is to set up a short pad, then place a baby wall on top of your box in the direction you want to go. Throw a mini crash pad on top of it, and then when you hit the launch pad, you'll fly much further and much faster. To get the crash pad on top of the baby wall every time, back all the way up, then throw it halfway between the second and third line if it's a brick cone. If it's a metal cone, line up the first white line with where these two panels meet. When the metal is newly built, it's harder to see, but it's still visible. Another powerful use case is when you get the roaming redeploy augment. It allows you to deploy your glider anytime you crash pad. But while these are powerful, they're pretty situational. Launch pads are mostly in the northeast, mega city, and on the loot island. And it's complete RNG whether or not you're offered the roaming redeploy augment. So let's look at more general use cases. Because they're smaller and don't break your builds, before you rotate, you can throw them down inside your box under a stair and use it when you edit out. This takes you 50 to 60 meters on flat ground. Of course, if you have any elevation, it'll greatly increase the distance one will take you. This means one stack of crash pads can take you 360 meters and 2 stacks 720, way more than enough to cover all of moving zones. Another benefit is the fact that while holding crash pads, you're essentially immune to fall damage. Both in mid-game fights and in in-game, you can play as far up on height as you want without risk. And if you're on height in in-game, you can even stay really high up so that rocket rams can't reach you. But are crash pads really better than rocket rams for in-game? Well, let's compare. A rocket ram can take you a maximum of 120 meters, which is twice the distance of a crash pad, but only if you aim it up in the sky where you're at high risk of getting beamed. When you try to use it safely along the ground, it's about 50 to 60 meters, same as a crash pad, but it does have the benefit of going straight through any builds or people that are in your way. It has a 25-second recharge time, which makes it great for partial zones since there's a wait time between zones to let it recharge. But in moving zones where it's non-stop, there will be many times where it's on cooldown and you'll have to tarp. The rocket ram also has an insanely long disable time, much longer than any other weapon we've seen in competitive. Even when you use it straight along the ground and don't go high in the air, there's almost a 5-second window where there's nothing you can do to defend yourself. And if you aim it up, it's even worse at almost 10 seconds of disable time. You can phase a cone before you start charging to try and protect yourself, but there's still plenty of time for an opponent to break the cone and kill you if they know you're about to rotate. And if someone does start shooting at you, all you can really do is hope they have bad aim. Crash pads, on the other hand, can't push you through builds and have limited charges, but they are much safer to use as they have no disable time, they have no cooldown, making them ideal for moving zones, and they prevent you from taking fall damage, making playing height less risky. In games, rocket rams are like worse shockwave hammers, where if you're suffocated on low ground, it'll get you through it, but at some point it's going to be on cooldown and you'll have to tarp. Whereas the new crash pads are more like worse katanas. They're great for playing height, great mobility, low cooldown, but if you box up on low ground and get covered, it's pretty much useless. It's also important to remember that rocket rams really take up 2 slots since both you and your teammate need one. But with crash pads, one of you can hold crash pads while the other holds C4s, extra heals, another weapon, or even a whole nother stack of crash pads if you need it. In terms of drop rate, you have the exact same chance of finding a rocket ram as you do a stack of 3 crash pads. The odds of getting a crash pad spawn is the exact same as a rocket ram in floor loot, normal chest, and even blue chests. The exceptions are heist bags and bosses. Heist bags have about a 1 in 3 chance of dropping a rocket ram, but all of the mini bosses like at South Slappy, Mega City, and Radio Towers have a 50% chance of dropping crash pads. So unless you land at a mythic POI, it's likely you won't have 2 rocket rams every game. Sometimes you won't get any, or you'll only get 1. That's okay. Mini crash pads are sufficient mobility to play in games. Rather than holding onto a single rocket ram hoping you find a second one later, or forcing a rotate through a mythic POI to try and find another, just use crash pads. They're not that bad. I literally see people choosing to run no mobility at all over crash pads. Now if your plan is to just rocket ram onto boxes to fight people, forget what I said. But if you're only really holding rocket rams to rotate in games, mini crash pads are a great alternative. At the end of the day, it's RNG whether or not you find crash pads or rocket rams off spawn, so you should know how to win with either rather than trying to force one. Especially with how many players are ignoring crash pads, you'll find extras all over, and if you know how to use them, they'll be your best friend. Thanks for watching, and shout out to Osirian for all the data about the spawn rates. They have data like this for all kinds of stuff over on their Twitter, so check them out.